Gene's
Gene.
here.
I'm ready. I'm
All right,
ready.
welcome to the Coastside Fire Protection District Board of Directors Regular Board Meeting, October 25th, 2021. Roll call, please, Gene.
It's not October.
What did I say?
October.
I said August, October? October 25th.
That's what I heard.
August 25th. I'm sorry.
Okay.
August.
Thank you.
Okay, roll
Gene?
call.
Yes.
Director Cheryl,
Yeah.
Director Stockman,
Here.
Director McKimmy,
Here.
Vice President Cockrell,
Here.
President Burke,
Here.
Chief Larkin,
Here.
Deputy Chief Secretary Cox,
Here.
Attorney Savory.
No.
She's out tonight. This
Kai.
is Attorney Reese.
Hi.
Kai Reese.
Okay.
Okay.
I got it. And myself, Gene Headley. Hi, everybody.
Good evening. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
To America.
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I make a motion to, first of all, are there any members of the public who would like to make any comments? Anybody on?
We have one from Susan Casey.
Susan Casey, would you like to address the board on this or on a special item
Yes.
on the,
Yes, I would
Susan?
like to address the board.
please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, board members. I live in El Granada Boulevard. My backyard looks down on Avenue Portola, the unfinished portion of Del Monte, often called the Fire Road. Over the years, we've been in touch with the Coastside Fire Protection District Fire Marshal to check on enforcement of ground fuel cleanup of these dense undeveloped parcels. In the winter and spring of 2019, a fire marshal sent correction notices to the property owners of the vacant lots near us. The vast majority of these lots remained untouched with no enforcement and no follow-up from CFPD. In April of this year, I scheduled an inspection with the fire marshal office for 8 parcels near our house along the fire road. An inspection with a fire marshal and Austin Sealy took place April 27. They agreed that there was substantial ground fuel on these lots, and I was informed that correction notices were sent to property owners later that day. I was told ordinance number 2019-03, section 304.1.2.1 was being cited for the cleanup of the ground fuel. I was told that 3 notices would be sent to these property owners, 1 per month. And if they did not comply, it would be sent to the San Mateo County District Attorney for fines imposed. In the first month, 2 of these have had some clearing, 1 substantially. No other work has been done in the 4 months. After 2 months, I requested an update and status from the fire marshal's office. I was told that they had given this issue over to the board of directors who were working on solutions for the overgrown vegetation in El Granada. On July 12th, I sent an email to Director Stockman for a status of these 8 parcels. And after not receiving a reply on July 27, I sent an email to all board of directors requesting a status. Tonight, I'm again requesting a status of these parcels. It appears that the process has stalled. It appears that the fire marshal's office is unable to enforce this ordinance. Or is the board not allowing enforcement of this ordinance? Couldn't the process of these already approved 8 parcels have been carried out simultaneously along with the important work being done by Director Stockman and the Vegetation Management Committee, as well as the work being done by Austin Sealy? There are a number of very dense vacant properties behind our houses in this area. Upon completion of the ground fuel cleanup, it was my plan to work with other neighbors along with the vacant property owners to pool our funds and take advantage of the county exemption for permits and fees and actually see how many mature eucalyptus we could remove, similar to the 31 trees that were approved on the 4 properties just up the hill from me. We thought that we could take advantage of New Sky tree removal just up the hill since their equipment was already staged. One neighbor who had a permit to remove a few eucalyptus in her yard, decided for the time being not to remove them. She does not see the value in it with all the trees and ground fuel in the vacant lots behind her house that remained untouched. This is not the situation I want to be in when entering the coastside fire season. I was hopeful that much more would have been accomplished since the April 27th inspections, based on how it had been explained to me. Instead of our larger plan, my husband and I used our funds to remove some canopy that was approaching our house. Since this was not enforced and I could not find a status from anyone at CFPD, we have to wait for next year. Then it seems like we've been waiting for a while, including in 2019. Just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak, and want to thank profusely the Coastside Fire Protection District for the incredible response on Upper El Granado Boulevard, July 2nd, when there was that house fire up there.
Susan, thank you very much. Chief Cox, perhaps you could address this subject in the chief's report later on in the meeting, please. I know it has come up previously, but thank you very much, Susan. Moving on, I make a motion to approve the consent calendar, and I note that Director McKimmey recuses himself from this vote on the consent calendar. Do I have a second?
Yes, second, please.
Moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar. A vote, please. Jean. Roll call, please, Jean. Jean.
You're muted.
Okay, I'm Sarah. I'm here. Who was the second?
Director Stockman.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Director Cheryl,
Yes.
Director Stockman,
Yes,
Vice President Cockrell,
Yes.
and President Burke.
Yes.
Passes 4-0 by roll call. Thank you.
With one abstention.
Moving on, without any objection, I'd like to change the agenda just a little bit to provide our guest Paul Mitchell from Redistricting Partners to give his presentation, which is actually item A under new business, and then we'll come back to continuing business if that's agreeable with the board members. If so, Paul or Chief Cox or Paul, do we need any introduction? Paul, you're on. You're muted.
Is that better?
That's better. Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. And thanks for allowing me to go a little bit early. I have a commitment at 7, so I really appreciate being able to do this now. So first off, I'll make sure I can share my screen. Yeah, I've got a PowerPoint presentation that I've put together just to kind of go through some of the basics, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. For frame of reference, our firm Redistricting Partners has been working on both redistricting and conversions of at-large districts, at-large agencies to districts under the California Voting Rights Act. We've been doing it for about 10 years, doing a lot of community college, special district, city, county, and other work. It's becoming a busy year for us. I'm sure the PowerPoint should be coming up now. So I'm going to go through just a 101 on the redistricting process, on the process of converting under the California Voting Rights Act. And I'm just going to cover a few things. What are the California Voting Rights Act and redistricting? Go over state and federal law a little bit. I'm not an attorney, but I can talk about the policies that are impacted by changes in the law. Talk about gerrymandering, because that's often something that comes up. Go over some traditional redistricting principles, and then talk about the census data. So the California Voting Rights Act is a law that was implemented almost 20 years ago, but it has become more affected in the last several years as courts have interpreted the law, and as more people have gotten in the act of going out and trying to get agencies to convert. An at-large election system is an election system where voters maybe vote for 2 people one election and 3 the other, and the entire body of the electorate all votes for all the members of the board. versus districts where they're individual areas and only the people who live in that area can run, and they're the only ones that actually vote. The law uses a term around racially polarized voting that I'm happy to answer questions about, but it essentially is a question of whether or not different voters vote in patterns that can be defined largely on the race of those voters. It's an area of law that has been around for a long time, but the California version of the Voting Rights Act really makes it easier to bring cases in agencies where there is this kind of voting pattern. So in federal law, they use this term called majority minority to define an area that might need protection, but California law loosened that to essentially say that you could have a violation anywhere that you have an ability to elect a candidate of choice for the minority community, or an ability to influence the election. And then there's all this stuff we can talk about with regard to how demand letters were filed and how lawyers have been using this as a way to get fees from agencies that have to go through the conversion. But you can go ahead and reduce the liability for those fees by doing a certain process called the safe harbor provisions of the California Voting Rights Act. And so a lot of agencies seek to do this process in order to avoid having to pay more legal fees. The redistricting or the districting should be thought of primarily as a function of elections. It determines who can run in that office and who votes, but it doesn't have to change the whole culture of the board. It doesn't have to change the way that you work. We do see some cities, as an example, where they'll say, put on their door or even on their business card, serving the communities of blah, blah, blah. But that's not required, that you kind of break up the way that the agency's governed based on the districts. You can treat the districts as just an election day thing, and the rest of the 2 years in between, you're acting as a full board with the interests of all the residents. When we get into redistricting, we follow a lot of the same rules when we go to districts the first time as we do with redistricting. And the legal constructs that we get into have to do with two different concepts in the law. One is equal protection and the idea that everybody should have equal access to government and representation. If you had one district that had twice as many people, that district's voters actually have half as much representation because their ability to have a representative that's fighting for them is lessened than somebody who's in a smaller district. And the same thing's true with voting. If you had a district that was twice as big as another, that voting block on the size that's the bigger district would have their votes what's called diluted, meaning that they, it'd take 2 votes to be as effective as a resident in the other district that's small. So the idea of balancing districts is this electoral and representation fairness. Gerrymandering is often what, if I get in an Uber and the guy says, what do you do? And I say redistricting, the first thing that they say is, oh, you gerrymander. Gerrymandering comes from this old political cartoon, Governor Gary. And it's the idea of, to really break down what gerrymandering is, it's the idea of using the line drawing process for some ulterior motive that is not apparent and that doesn't have the interest of the public, that is simply usually a personal or political interest as opposed to the public's interest. And we think of it as being an old timey thing, but this is actually a state Senate district that California had in 2001. And you can see it has the head, the talons, the wings. To me, it looks like the original gerrymander. So we still have gerrymandering, whether we see it all the time or not. There's actually 3 types of gerrymandering, a few additional, but these are the 3 primary. One we think of a lot is partisan gerrymandering. So, in Congress, drawing districts for partisan advantage, and we hear a lot about that. Racial gerrymandering, that's another one that we hear a lot about. You hear about districts that have long squiggly lines and go and pick up all the black voters in a district in North Carolina or something like that, that's drawn to either split up the black vote in a bunch of areas so they can't elect somebody, or squeeze every black voter into one district so they can elect person in one district, but they can't elect people in the other districts. That idea of cracking a community or packing a community is generally kind of the way that redistricting works, or the gerrymandering works. And the third kind, which is probably more pernicious and, and happens everywhere almost all the time when agencies redistrict themselves, is the idea of incumbent redistricting, where you're drawing districts where in the old days in California state legislature, they'd say, okay, it's time to redistrict. Everybody get, Paul, their address. And that would be the way the redistricting starts. Get everybody's address, then start drawing districts around that member's address with their town in it, and then go from there to draw the rest of the map. So incumbent gerrymandering is a third primary kind of gerrymandering. In order to combat gerrymandering, there are a number of traditional principles that are intended to make redistricting not gerrymandered. One is that idea of equal size, that districts be equal for representation and for voting power. Another is that they be contiguous, meaning whole parts. A third is that they maintain the communities of interest. So if you had, one community, like say the Black community, and you split into 12 districts, that's a Voting Rights Act community. But you might also have a community of people who work in the same industry, or farmers that live in one part of town, or people in a hillside that have a specific interest, and splitting them into a bunch of districts so they can't effectively vote for somebody would be another way of harming a community of interest. Oftentimes, to make redistricting fairer and cleaner, more understandable by voters, you want to follow existing governmental lines. So, if there's a city council line or a school board district, other things like that can be districts can be built on top of other jurisdictions to make voters understand that, like, oh, my district ends at that city line and the next district starts at that city line, rather than having districts just kind of start and end in random places. And then keeping districts compact, which is more about the shape than it is about that they're small. Because some districts, a district in Northern California is going to be really big. A district in downtown LA is going to be really small. It doesn't mean the downtown LA district's better. It just means it's about the shape. And I'll go through these a little bit in a little bit more detail. So population equality, we look at people. We look at residents based on the last decennial census. So it's not based on voters, not based on adults or citizens or something like that. It's based on total population. When we get into the redistricting process, you'll hear a term called deviation, which means that if every district was perfectly equal, then if one district's 5 people more than equal, that deviation is 5 people. If one district's 1% larger than it should be from a perfectly equal district, then that is a 1% deviation. And in redistricting, in a district like yours, you would be able to have a total of 10% deviation, which means that the biggest district can't be more than 10% bigger than the smallest district. And so that relative deviation of measuring the smallest district and the biggest district and making sure they're within 10% is meant to kind of put some guardrails on the idea of districts being equal size, but not being so prescriptive like in congressional districts to say that they have to be perfectly sized. In Congress, they have to be perfectly sized to one person. Every California congressional district last cycle was 702,904 people, give or take one person. And we're not going to do that. Districts do need to be contiguous, which means whole parts, but there's a little bit of a catch to this. Some agencies, I think your agency is one as an example, are not made up of entirely, you might have like a little bit of a part that's not directly connected, or you might have something that is directly connected, but is on the other side of, a body of water or a hillside, or, not connected because there's a freeway or a road that separates those areas. So contiguity we'll talk about being more than just like that idea of one whole part. We'll talk about it being whether or not it makes sense to put these two pieces together, because maybe they look like they're together on a satellite photo, but when you actually get into looking at the whole area as a whole, it's not actually one whole piece. Sorry, let me get back to this. The communities of interest piece is one that we'll get into because we'll want to see if there's members of the community that want to come forward and talk about their community of interest. Communities of interest can be different types of populations that live in an area, like, you know, seniors or students, or if it's a downtown area with a lot of apartments, or a rural or urban area. You might have areas that have different needs in terms of how they interact with the agency. You might have areas that, you know, where I grew up, we had the hillsides that had very different needs than the downtown area. And so you'll look at your agency and how it might have communities of interest that would be different than another one. And with special districts, you can find communities of interest really being specific to the agency. So as an example, when we've done water district redistricting, we've looked at things like where the almond growers are, or where the walnut growers are. We even looked at, in water district redistricting, at elevation, because people in higher elevation had different needs from the water agency and had different rates that they paid. And communities of interest really do relate back to kind of the agency. So it is very subjective. So we want to look for communities of interest, and we want to look at these three things. A group that can be identified, like have a name, like what is that community and how do they define themselves? We want to have communities that have a geographic nature, like what is their footprint? Where do they exist? And then we want to look at what's the relationship between that group and the agency. So that's what a community of interest is, and we can talk about that some more. Districts need to be compact. I mentioned that they need to be more sphere or square shaped and less squiggly lines. In fact, in some states, they have all these crazy mathematical equations for what's compact. In some states, they say things literally, there's a state constitution that says districts can't have funny shapes. So districting and the idea of compactness is something that has had a lot of different varieties of definitions around the country. In California, we have this really clean definition for compactness. And that is that districts are compact if they're not bypassing nearby populations to go get far away populations. And I put two maps here that might not be very easy to see, but one of them, the one on the left, is the city of Martinez. And they have this blue district, all these districts, the magenta one, the blue one, the orange one, the green one. They don't just like draw a district that makes sense and then another one next to it. These are all little squiggly lines that go through the city. They connect far away places that don't have like a shared interest. And this district, that district on the left, is absolutely not compact. The one on the right also, it's hard to see necessarily, but in the lower southeastern corner, there's a red area where there's that community and there's a freeway. And this district was drawn with this community here and a lot of other nearby areas where they could have drawn the district. But instead, they went under the freeway and came out the other side and went all the way over to the other end of the city to get the rest of the population. So those are both examples of districts that aren't compact under state law. So when we're drawing districts, we're going to draw districts that look more like squares and circles rather than like long squiggly lines or arms wrapping around or anything like that that we see in other redistrictings. So I mentioned that redistricting uses the census to determine that equal population, but it's more than just the data. In redistricting, we have two important data sets, and then we have the geography of redistricting called the census blocks, the census block groups, and the census tracts. So we'll get more into this throughout the process, but what we want to think about is that some data is like the point in time data, and some data is averages and estimates that the census provides. The key geographic area in redistricting, you might in your work be familiar like locally with parcels. That's a way of creating geographic shapes around houses or properties. In the census, they do census blocks, which can be maybe 15 parcels or something like that. And then they'll take those 15 parcels and another 15 parcels and maybe a hillside and something else, and they'll put all three of those into a block group. And then they'll take that block group and 3 or 4 other nearby block groups, and they'll put that into a tract. So they're perfectly nested geographies that are used in census. And that's what we get for the purpose of drawing lines. We're drawing lines based on those blocks, block groups, and tracts. They're perfectly nested. They start off really tiny, then they get bigger, and then they get pretty large. So if you're looking at data, we'll see on the maps areas, these shapes, and we can draw based on the census block level, and we can add the data up at any of these geographies. The data is really 2 key data sets. One is the decennial census file. That's the one that just came out. It is very late. It was supposed to be out April 1st, and it just came out on August 12th. That is the data that tells us how many people are in each census block and allows us to build districts that are that equal population. The second data set is the American Community Survey, and that's the data set that looks at all the ways that we characterize neighborhoods. So if you were to say, Paul, you know, what's the number of renters in this area? Well, it's not in the decennial data, but it is in the American Community Survey. I can look at renters and homeowners. I can look at things like educational attainment or, you know, ages. There's also data in the American Community Survey that determines the citizen voting age population. So if we were to say, what is the effective voting power for Latinos, Asians, or Blacks, or Hawaiians, or Alaskan natives, or American natives, all that data is in the census from the American Community Survey. And it's all estimates that comes out every year, but that's what we use in redistricting, is that estimated data when it comes to characterizing the communities. And we use the point data when it comes to determining the size of each district. So we use both data sets. And finally, the process that we're using has, we're going to be going through a few hearings to get through this process. This first meeting is a look at the outreach, or at the process that we're going to be using. And we're going to be doing a map training. Let me see something. And I'll look and see if we have, I don't know if we have your mapping tool up. Do we have that up yet? Do you know?
We do not know. I do
Okay.
not know.
We'll get that for you so that we can show you that. And if we need to, we can schedule a time to show that to you. We'll be having a public hearing and a map presentation after the new year, and be able to revise those maps in February, and then the final vote, move all that into March. So really, this is a process that we're largely going to be undertaking after the new year. So after all the county redistricting is done, all the state redistricting is done, then we'll come back and update all of that. But that's essentially the process that we're undertaking. And we had done some original maps to look at the area and the total population. It looked like in the first estimates that we got that the district was around 24,000 people. You have a population of Latinos, which is around a quarter of the total population is Latino in terms of its total population. But when we look at that citizen voting age population, that percentage drops down to about 15%. And you have very small Asian and Black populations in the district. When we start developing mapping scenarios for you, you're going to see each district and the full agency on maps to kind of break it all down and provide, you know, an understanding of, in potential maps, how they would be broken up into districts. And we've done some redistricting in your area with other water districts, the Harbor District. So we're pretty familiar with those communities, and we'll work with you and your staff to develop some drafts so that we can have something for you as soon as possible. We're also going to get you updated data and a short memo about the new population that came out in the most recent census update. And with that, I'll go ahead and take any questions, and we
Thank
can
you.
have a conversation about it.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions, comments? And let me just preface this by saying, of course, the board has already voted to go to district election, so that's behind us. But questions for Paul? I have a question, and I'm not sure, Paul, that it's you that's going to answer it or not, but what is we have elections coming up in 2022 for the board. What's the timeline? That's, we're supposed to vote, as I understand what you just said, for the final districts in March. How does that affect, is that going to affect our November elections?
Yeah, so that's going to be in time for your November elections. And you'll be able to use those new boundaries for running for office and filing in time for those elections with that March process. Most counties are requiring that the agencies have, the new data in by June. They'll actually not even process that data until after the primary election to create all the new precincts and everything from all the redistrictings that happen. But I believe the timeline we're working on with you has you get done, right there at March 23rd was the date, so that we can get all that processed and off to the county and they can set up and make sure that everybody knows where they're going to be running for office.
Other questions?
Yes, Paul, Steve Stockman. Yeah, we've had discussions of this, and then we realized that there's, like you've mentioned, a lot of other districts on the coast. Probably the closest one that represents the entire coast side is probably our school district. But, we have 5 directors, and we have 2 in Montera, basically, myself in El Granada, and 2 in Half Moon Bay. So, we're trying to look at that from what you've said tonight, that block of population. Those are all probably pretty equal to number wise. And it's going to be curious. I don't know. I guess my question is, have you looked at the population from your work with the other districts on the coast side? And do we feel that it's fairly balanced now? Have you done a quick snapshot of that as it relates to the existing directors or the representation of the communities that they represent?
Yeah, we haven't taken the snapshot yet. And what we generally want to do is we want to draw the lines without thinking about where the current directors are right now and draw the lines based on just the population, how it sets. It sounds like what you're saying is that you think that you're pretty well dispersed.
Yes.
That's fortunate for you. It's really unfortunate when we go into redistricting and becomes a tug of war where, we know of cities where, there's 3 people that live in the same census block,
Right.
And it's really fortunate if you are more spread out. And what we generally do is we draw the districts based on all those traditional criteria, but then you as directors might see 3 versions of maps and say, aha, in this version of map, I think that's more politically tenable. That's the one that maybe that version of the map might be able to get the votes. And that's the more appropriate place to have that thought about, where the directors are, rather than front loading it and saying like,
Correct.
Let's just draw all the directors' houses and then figure out from there. Cause it's not really largely sustainable as a strategy for the redistricting.
Right.
Bruce, you
Thank
had a
you.
question? I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Steve.
What is your group going to charge us for this little adventure?
I actually don't do the billing, so I don't know exactly what we're charging you, but generally, the costs are, in the 30,000, 40,000 range or something like that for all the
I
work.
think we approved a $30,000 fee, if I recall correctly.
Right.
Okay.
And so does your group work with a group that's suing the district?
No, we don't. I don't even know who is that's suing the district.
Hmm.
There are, just to be totally fair and honest, there have been cases where like, there's a Yola County supervisor who's Matt Rexroad, who does redistricting. And he has called me and said, oh, by the way, I'm going to be suing Davis. And yep, we ended up doing the redistricting in Davis, although it wasn't like some kind of handoff, Sometimes we hear about it, but we don't work with them directly.
Other
Okay.
questions? Cynthia? You're mute, Cynthia.
Sorry. You mentioned a number of different, of course, criteria, and then you mentioned a number of different
the criteria being adjacency and compactness and those things. And then you mentioned a number of considerations. And the considerations were sort of descriptive of the populations. So you could divide it merely by population, or you mentioned people involved in agriculture, and would their needs be different from people who were more densely packed bedroom communities?
Yeah.
We have all of that, of course, here in our area. Who sets the priority of which criteria guides the redistricting process? I can understand the physical parameters being pretty straightforward, but the other criteria that has to do with the nature of the populations and what their differing needs might be, who sets those priorities?
That would be you. So you are the agency that's doing the redistricting, and will put out information and data to help you look at those issues. But ultimately, you'd be the ones that have to make the subjective choices about, we know this community, we've lived here. We understand that these community members might have different issues they come forward to us with. These community members might have different services they rely on us for. And so we're going to draw districts in a way that's reflective of that. And you can think about it like, let's say that there are maybe two different pockets of the agency where that there's very specific needs that they are, that they have for the agency. It would be proper to take those groups and make sure that districts are drawn to allow them to be more effective in bringing those concerns forward and using that community of interest as a way to draw the districts in a way that was fair for them. What would be unfair is, let's say there's one side of town and they're always complaining about this one thing. And then you took them and you split them into 5 pieces. That would be eliminating their ability to be effective in having a voice, with the directors. So redistricting really tries to amplify the voices of communities of interest by drawing the director areas in a way that makes them able to be more effective at electing candidates, and makes those directors more accountable to them, for decades,
So do you know we're a fire district?
Yeah.
People dial 911 and we respond with the closest engine and resources.
Yeah.
I
So,
don't get what you're talking about. It doesn't
Well,
make sense with a fire district, period.
I think that, so first off, we have agencies doing this redistricting that will say oftentimes, like a hospital district in San Mateo County or the Harbor District or others, they say, well, we're just a service. Like, why should people have different districts? What is their community of interest? And that's really up to you. You might end up just saying, like, Paul, our community doesn't have like a lot of strong communities of interest. Let's just draw districts that are compact and make good shapes and make sense. But you also might, and like I say, I don't know your exact experience, but like where I grew up, there was a hillside area, and
We're talking about the coast side right here, right now.
Look, let me interrupt just for a moment here. We're going to be dealing with this for the next 6 months. The question of whether we go to districting has passed. We've voted for it. There's no question that we're going to get around this thing. And so to discuss, the viability or the legalness of this type of thing, I don't think is very productive at this point. Any further questions for Paul? Paul, I'll just ask if we do have some major questions as we go forward with this, I assume you're available to come back and chat with the board?
Absolutely. And we're going to be providing you some documents as well.
And we already have, by the way, we've been passed out a redistricting manual, which has been very helpful.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's got a lot of information in it.
Yeah. And any final questions? Because I think this is going to be going on. JB, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. The question is, you're going to present us with some sort of a document that's going to lay out the districts. Is this, once we get it, is it in concrete, or will there be any modifications?
Yeah, it's an iterative process. So if we provide you with some drafts, it'll be so that you can, say, well, we like this version, but we want to change this or this and make adjustments and make a new version so that you finally adopt a plan that you guys all agree to.
What's that? Thank you.
Very good. Paul, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thanks very much. And I really do appreciate you allowing me to present first. I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
We look forward to seeing your work product. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Moving on, we're going back to continuing business, item 6, and this is an update on the Vegetation Management Action Plan. Director Stockman and Director Cheryl, I believe, also, and Chief Cox. Steve, you want to kick it off? You're on mute, Steve. Steve, you're on mute.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll
Okay.
begin by saying we met last week, Cynthia, myself, and Chief Cox. I want to begin by saying, I really appreciate Cynthia stepping in and sitting on this vegetation committee, especially as a new member. Her insight already and her greater knowledge of the coast side and the community we serve is going to be helpful. I think we're both approaching it with what I've expressed as a committee member before, that this is just a very complex issue, and especially to Miss Casey's letter. We'll talk to that later in the process, and because a great deal of the meeting between the three of us discussed that letter, discuss those paper lots, and I think it would be better. Well, you also in correspondence at the end of the meeting of the concerns of all those citizens that live in those El Granada Highlands. So, and I'm going to ask Chief Cox after my update to fill any blank spaces. But basically, Chief Cox provided both Cynthia and I kind of a greater background and then a review of our process, especially as it relates to abatement. Now, we're all quite brought up to speed on the abatement process for weeds, and that how the district will for those lots that don't respond, we have a contractor that cuts those grasses down and bills that property owner, and that's effective. But with this issue, timber on it and overgrown fuels, it's hard for it to fit in that abatement place. And then also the complexity comes from that, we're talking about different, not everything falls to the fire district. You have county government, you have county parks, you have watershed, you have open space district, and not just specifically to those lots, but it makes the issue of vegetation management that all these government partners are working at this issue all at once. And all of that urgency and that concern has been elevated by the changes in our climate and the way the state combined with the drought and the way that fires are burning now. So it's a very real issue, and it's going to take great deal of focus, and it's going to take great deal of partnership cooperation, and also from us as district directors. It's going to take education and outreach and continuing to work with all those agencies to see what's working in other places, because these issues they're political, they are economical, and they are life safety amongst a bunch of other elements. So now back to the meeting, to the update to all of my fellow directors. So we discussed those paper lots, we discussed the abatement, and we talked about the enforcement. So the district can change its policy on what's expected out of property owners, but then there's also the issue of how that is enforced. in that relationship with the county and the DA's office to have some actual ability to follow up and make these lot owners pay for those upkeep of those properties. We talked about trying to determine the scope of this issue and the cost involved, and whether or not we needed some kind of a consultation, consultant to come in and give us a deeper idea of determined costs and the scope of an entire project. When I say project, I mean removing fuels, or the ability to make a property owner remove fuels from their property. Then we talked a little bit about philosophy, which I think is important, especially for the Casey letter. That, you know, we need to always make certain as directors and as an agency that we're standing with the community, right? That we're responsive, that we're transparent. I believe that we are. I believe that we continue to do that. But with that responsibility is also a timeliness. The timeliness on this issue, I feel the frustration of all those community members that live at the top of the Highlands. To wait a year for some kind of response or some kind of follow-up is really unacceptable from a district standpoint and from all government standpoint. So I want the community to understand that we don't take that lightly and that we're trying to adjust to that. With that, I want to, you know, I would ask Chief Cox to jump in here, because we talked about and just talk about the financial, and I think this is important to the community that's listening, and also to all of us as directors as educational. And Chief Cox, would you go back into a little bit of our discussion that day of just
Hey,
the
Steve,
just the
Steve,
Yes.
could I ask that we give Cynthia an opportunity to speak before Chief Cox, please? Just to see if she has anything.
Thank you, Gary, for that. So Cynthia, your perspective on these meetings that we've had and the direction we're trying to go.
Thank you, Director Stockman. And I have had a pretty good learning curve here the last month and a half. And I appreciate your assessment of the situation, Director Stockman. And thank you so much for all of the support that you have given me as I've gone through this learning process. It seems to me, and Chief Cox, you have stood beside us and provided incredibly valuable information. It's the scope of the problem, it's the urgency of the problem, it's the interagency nature of the problem, it's the cost, it is the fact that it is taking vegetation mitigation to a deeper and higher level than it has been done before. It's the combination of agencies that are required to step beyond weed abatement and go into really removing trees, limbing trees, coming up with a comprehensive plan for native vegetation, replacing eucalyptus, for example, and going forward. And so there has been this technical aspect of what we are putting together now as an active action plan. But I just want to thank Susan Casey and her incredibly thoughtful, articulate, well-documented letter that served to focus us, because it was so well written and because she's been at this so conscientiously for so long, in a cooperative aspect with both the Coastside Fire Protection District and her neighborhood, to say your voice is really serving as and the example that we are working towards. If we can resolve a user-friendly way, a resident-friendly way of responding to your issues on the scale that we have, and is that scale 200 parcels? Is it 2,000 parcels? We don't really know yet. But if we can resolve, if we can come up with an answer to what you need, we're going to have an excellent process and a huge step forward. There's just a lot of parts to it. And that's what we're trying to organize and quantify and move forward as quickly as possible with, because we understand the urgency of the situation you're presenting.
Thank you, Cynthia. Chief Cox?
Thank you, President Burke. I'll just note right now that on the meeting is also Fire Marshal Gary Silva and Deputy Fire Marshal Austin Seeley. So if we have any specific questions, they are also on here. Just a couple things I want to kind of frame for this conversation is, first of all, I echo Director Cheryl's comments from Susan Casey. We always appreciate the feedback and kind of the perspective from the public. I would just kind of like to set the stage for the district currently, when it comes to vegetation management, has a weed abatement program, an annual weed abatement program, and that is for seasonal weeds. So if someone has an empty lot, we go in, we tell them they need to clear it by a certain date. If they don't, we clear it, and the district recovers and recoups the funds. There's a process with that where we have to notice the landowner. There's a process for getting bids for contractors. There's a processing for billing and then putting it on the tax roll. So it is fairly intensive process. It takes quite a bit of staff time and obviously going out and inspecting. In general, though, it costs the district usually somewhere about $30,000 out of pocket annually to do that, because mowing a lot is fairly light work when we're talking about vegetation management. What has come to light and what Susan has really daylighted in the issue that we have is the abundance of unimproved parcels in the district that abut improved parcels that have structures on them that has vegetation of either brush or timber or a dead and dying fuel that doesn't fall in the weed abatement program. So we're talking about heavy fuels. We're talking about brush, chaparral, steeper slopes, dead and dying trees, and very expensive work that needs to be done on this property. This isn't a $30,000 endeavor for the district. Austin has spent about a month going through the highest fire severity zone in the district, actually categorizing all of these properties, and he's up to over 200 that would need work done on them. And when you're talking about that sort of kind of manual labor, we're looking at millions of dollars of capital outlay from the district's perspective just to get the work done in those very high fire hazard areas. So I know, Susan, it feels as though it's probably not addressing your needs in a timely manner, but we are definitely taking a systemic look at this. We can't play whack-a-mole with this issue, essentially only kind of dealing with the lots that we get identified. So kind of the synthesis of it all is, when we have a lot like this, we have three options. We can refer it to the DA and they can try to follow up with misdemeanor or infraction penalties. We can go down the
Oh, we're getting somewhere.
or we can go down the litigation process. Those are really the three options. And what we talked about during the Vegetation Management Committee is trying to get an actual professional study done of what an expansion of the district's abatement program would look like, with quantifiable data as to what it might cost, to the scope of the number of plots that would fall in that in the district, and just some recommendations about how the district might implement that going forward. So I know, Susan, that doesn't really solve the problem right now, but this is a district-wide problem. And I think some better data and kind of study on it for the district to make some policy decisions is really what we discussed more than anything on that veg management call.
This is going to be an ongoing issue and on our agenda for some time, of course, but are there any questions to either the committee or Chief Cox? Yeah, Chief, I guess I would just ask, and I know the committee is looking at this, but to the extent you can, I know there's a lot of moving parts on this thing, but the extent you can put down some timelines and dates as to what can be done. Are there legal ways that if we were to upfront the money to get it done, that we could recover from the landowners if in fact they don't act? Those are the kind of things that I think would be very helpful, just to get the ball moving a little bit faster. But a timeline and an action plan certainly is badly needed.
Yes.
Yep.
Anything else? Okay,
I would say I would say, Gary, that we've scheduled 2 additional meetings to talk specifically just to your point. And then within that existing action plan, I want to add as the last meeting was the release of the county Ready, Set, Go brochure that we should see in our community soon. And that it also has the Zone Haven elements of that Ready, Set, Go plan. The specific evacuation zones on the coast side. I think it'll be very informative to the community. And I commend the staff for meeting that action point on time, on date. And so we'll continue to change and update our action plan between Cynthia and I and Chief Cox. And so your request will fit nicely into that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all. Moving on, continuing business item B, discuss section 115 retirement pre-funding investment options. And that has mine. I'm sorry, Bruce?
I'm going to recuse myself.
Yes, I understand.
Copy that. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me just give you, first of all, this is not an action item. This is information. And I'm just going to kind of quickly go over a couple of points on this and call your attention to which I'm sure you've already taken a look at, that in our packets, there are 2 proposals on section 115 retirement plans that are in your packet that you could look at your leisure. But let me just go through a couple of points here to put it in perspective for you. That again, there's no action on this item. I'd also tell you this has nothing to do with CAL FIRE at all. That is completely separate from that count. The crux of this issue that at least concerns me is that we have at this point, as you're well aware, we have some $10 million in reserve funds. That money has been accumulated over many, many years and is intended to address the need for a new Station 44 here on the coast side. And that has not changed. That addressing that problem is part of our strategic plan and continues to be the top of the priority. However, that money is in LAIF primarily, and in a small portion of it in the county. It's probably earning roughly about 1%. At this point in time, we're in a situation now where inflation is probably greater than what we're earning on that money, which is a concern of mine. The section 115 trust that you'll see in the detailed material that you have presents a different opportunity to use that money in a more productive fashions. There are at least 2 organizations, PAS and CalPERS, who provide that kind of service. And I'm not going to try to go through the detail, but I would call your attention that in the PAS material that you have, the material on the section 115 trust begins on page 21. The first part of it has to do with the healthcare trust fund, which is not what we're addressing at this point. We have, at least from one of these 2 companies, PAS, we've had excellent results with the trust fund that we've put together for the healthcare for our prior employees. And again, I'm sure you're probably well aware of that, to the extent that money has accumulated over the year. But I don't believe that addressing the Station 44 building and creating a section 115 trust are mutually in conflict. I think that we could do both of them. I would point out that when we first started the PAS trust fund for healthcare, we started out with a very small amount of money. Now it's self-sustaining. And it seems to me that we could actually address both of them. But in the following months, as you probably know, we're going to have a lot more information on what we're able to do with Station 44. In fact, there's an item on the agenda addressing that as well. My takeaway on this item on the agenda is very simple. I would ask that the board members join me in just studying the material so that in subsequent meetings, we can have an intelligent discussion as to the viability if we want to do something with this type of thing. I'm expecting that later this fall, we would have some additional information on Station 44 and relative costs and so forth. And then, at least in my timeline, I'd like to come back to this subject, that is the Section 115 retirement pre-funding, come back to this subject in January of 2022. So this is just strictly kind of a preview of something that I think is necessary to take a look at. And I would hope that in the coming few months, we'll have additional information that might allow us to make some intelligent decisions at the first of the year. That's it. Any questions? Okay, hearing none, moving on. Let's see. Item B, on-call architecture and engineering service, approve and direct fire chief to develop and solicit request for proposal for new district architecture and engineering services, Chief Cox.
Thank you, President Burke. You kind of hit on it a little bit there. There's a couple projects within the district that we are looking to implement with the next fiscal year that we've just started. The biggest one of those being a scoping and feasibility study for the replacement of Fire Station 44. But there are some other ones, including the header being raised at Station 44, as well as potentially some security fencing at Station 40. So what we are requesting is to put an RFP out there for an on-call architecture and engineering service, so that we have a vendor we can use to actually scope and get those projects moving. That RFP has been developed. We are just looking for approval now to actually put the RFP out so that we can bring back the proposals for the board to make a decision on.
I make a motion that the board approve and direct the fire chief to develop and solicit requests for proposal for on-call architecture and engineering services. Do I have a second?
I second it.
Got a second? Moving second. Any discussion? Roll call, please, Jean. You're mute, Jean. Jean.
Okay, I'm sorry.
All right. Roll call,
Director
please.
Cheryl, Director Cheryl,
Yes.
Director Stockman,
Yes.
Vice President Cockrell,
Yes,
President Burke,
Yes.
passes 4-0 by roll call.
Moving on to item C, discuss and approve surplus of equipment and vehicle, Chief Cox.
Thank you. This is a follow-up to the vehicle replacement and equipment replacement plan. The new utility 40 being in service now. The old red Ford pickup is surplus. We are proposing a closed bid process and looking for approval to move forward.
I move that the district move forward with directions to dispose of the surplus equipment and vehicles. Do I have a second?
President Burke, can I just interject one moment here? It looks like there's
Yes.
nobody from the public attending at this point, but I just want to make sure that's correct in case there is someone from the public that wants to speak
there
on
is
the item.
one person from the public that I can see. Michelle Dragoni
Oh,
is
it's
here.
here.
I see Michelle, Gary Silva.
I'm sorry, Bruce.
I see two. I thought I saw two.
Gary's our chief. He's ours.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
All right, we
Yes,
have a
it's on.
motion. We have a motion to approve the deposition. What is it? The sale of, what are we using here?
Surplus.
Surplus, yeah, the surplus, the equipment and vehicles, the Ford pickup and a pickup campus shell. Do I have a second?
Second.
Moved in second. Any discussion? Roll call, please, Jean.
Director Cheryl,
Yes.
Director Stockman. Director Stockman, you're
You're
Muted.
mute, Steve. Steve,
He's frozen
Steve,
also. I'm not sure he's hearing us. He's not
Hello,
moving.
Steve.
let's go
Stockman,
forward. Move
hello.
on. We'll get it later.
Vice President Cockrell
Yes,
and President Burke.
Yes.
And Director McKimmy.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. You're there this time.
Yeah.
Director McKinney.
Yes.
Okay,
Sorry. Passes, well, do I say it
Aye.
passes 5-0 or not? We haven't gotten,
yes, Director Stockman may be having some technical
he dropped out. I don't think
difficulties.
he's not even there anymore.
Yeah, okay, we're moving on. Moving on to
Uh,
item D, review and approve actuarial study of retiree healthcare liabilities. Chief Cox,
Okay, I'm gonna recuse again.
Okay.
got you.
Thank you, President Burke. This is really a reporting requirement for the district regarding the retiree health under the General Accounting Standards Board and the staff report. You'll see that there is the recommendation to accept the report as delivered.
Thank you, Chief Cox. Let me just mention a little bit on the study itself is in our packet and is a public document for anybody to take a look at. There's a lot of figures in there and so forth, but the page 1 and 2, the summary, I think tells you the necessary details. The bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, is that this, and by the way, this is another thing, has nothing to do with CAL FIRE. This addresses a previous union prior to CAL FIRE. But the bottom line is that the money that we've put aside and invested with PARS to address and make sure that the farm employees have health care through their lifetime is at this point in time $1 million overfunded. So it's in fine shape. There are some 28 farm employees who are covered by this item. Their average age happens to be about 60, but the payment and the fund to take care of this is on track and is in good shape. So I'm going to move that we approve the actuarial study of retiree healthcare liabilities. Do I have a second?
Second,
Any discussion or questions? Roll call, please, Jean.
Director Cheryl,
Yes,
Director Stockman. Director Stockman,
He
You're muted.
has
Tell me
technical
where is it?
problems.
oh, okay, I'm sorry. Vice President Burke, I'm sorry,
Yes.
Vice President Cockrell
yes,
and President Burke.
Yes,
I guess we'll go 4-0 by roll call.
okay. Moving on to item E, I believe here. Review and approve fixing employer health contributions for retired representatives. And there are 3 actual resolutions, 2021-43, 2021-44, 2021-45. Chief Cox, could you give us an overview of what these are about?
Thanks. I think Director McKimmy had his hand up there.
I'm
Oh,
recusing again.
all right. Thanks, Bruce.
President Burke, this is in relation to the annual health premiums for retirees, again, separate than CAL FIRE. If you remember this year, those rates went up in January. And instead of waiting for the rates to go up and then having to compensate the difference back to the retiree, we've gotten the rates from the healthcare providers, and we are looking for direction to increase that for these 3 classifications of employees.
Thank you, Chief. And again, this is pretty much boilerplate, but I'm going to make a motion to approve all 3 of these together. I make a motion to adopt Resolution 2021-43, Resolution 221-44, and Resolution 221-45. I make the motion. Do I have a second?
second,
Second. I think that was JB.
yes, yes.
Discussion? Comments? This is to be expected. It happens annually or semi-annually, whatever it takes. Hearing no questions or comments, roll call, please, Jean.
Director Cheryl,
yes,
Director Stockman. Sorry, he's gone. Vice President Cockrell,
Yes,
President Burke,
Yes.
passes 3-0 by roll call.
Thank you. All right, moving on to Board of Director and Chief Report. Finance Committee. Finance Committee did not meet, but there's a couple of items that I and perhaps JB would like to discuss. The unaudited spreadsheets for the district are available, a public document, are in the packet today. a couple of obvious just observation. Our total revenues were 109% of budget. Our total expenses were 75% of budget. Total salaries and benefits versus total revenue was 54%. And if you recall, we had a goal of 75%. So it was an exceptional year in that sense. We were 59% of, well, not about. PAS is, as of 7/1/20 was $3.8 million. As of 7/1/21 is $4.5 million, even though we've paid out $250,000 during the year. So the finances in PAS are very fine. And clearly what's really the major thing in terms of the fine financial area is that CAL FIRE costs was some 70% of budgets. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. And perhaps when Chief Cox or Chief Larkin, if he's on, might want to address that. But that's our status report of that. Also, from a finance point of view, in your packet is the annual safety plans of CalPERS and the financing for our district. It's a very thorough financial analysis. I would just, my personal opinion is, first of all, we have no choice. There is no vote to be taken on this or anything we want to do with it. The debt is on this, our unfunded liability has increased some $120,000 from the previous analysis that we had. We're also facing with CalPERS, as time goes on, increasing costs caused by not only the cost of medical care or, retirement costs, but also there is built-in COLAs for a lot of retirement costs that add to the increased costs. And frankly, the CalPERS losses in their investments have been substantial. So we're underfunded as a district at this point by some $12 million. And my comments earlier in the meeting relative to the Section 115 trust, just the information, at some point in time, if we choose to go forward, might address some of the unfunded liability we have with the CalPERS debt. Any comments or questions on that? With that, moving on, let's see here. Volunteer Committee. Chief Director Cockrell.
I did not attend the meeting as I was dealing with a medical issue.
All right. Item C, Land and Structures Committee report, Director Cockrell, Director McKinney.
Bruce, did you want to speak up on this?
No, I think it's going to deal with some closed session stuff. So,
okay, moving on. Vegetation Management Committee, Steve is not back on, but Cynthia, we've covered a lot. Or is there anything else that you'd like to add on the vegetation management?
No, so we really did cover all of the major issues.
Okay. Special District Association, no report. ALS JPA, no report. BDAC liaison report, no report. Emergency Preparedness, Director Stockman.
I'm back on cellular
okay.
only.
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, I apologize for loss of signal here, but I'm going to update you to the KEEP meeting August 6th. There was a presentation from Sandy Winter. Sandy Winter represents the senior co-siders and she gave a presentation on the emergency preparedness measures that they've taken. That's important to the district because there are 312 housing units that they represent, and they're divided into 3 nonprofits. So I think most of us on the board know the makeup of senior co-siders. But it's important that they've been doing planning. So CERT's done a wonderful job of organizing neighborhoods and individual families, but Sandy, through the senior co-siders, has involved an entire group of seniors, so 312 housing units, and then also adjacent to the facilities there on Main Street, is the Seacrest School, which adds another 270 pupils to 600 total people that they've developed an emergency action plan for. Many on the staff are already belong to CERT or our HAM volunteers on the coast side. So they're pretty well trained. And then also they've all have individual radios where they can communicate. They've also set up some unique things like in that senior housing, some drive, some don't. So they've partnered up the ones that can't and the ones that can. Chief Cosgrave and Don Matei are working on a shelter-in-place plan along with staff there. So that was the presentation from. We're trying to do presentations of individual groups on the coast side to update what they're doing. And then there's some Zone Haven updates. And again, that was Chief Cosgrave and Don Matei working to utilize that Zone Haven program. There was a August 10th meeting where there were involved tax planning and evacuation committees. And that the end game of that is trying to get law and fire to be able to report back to county EOC more accurately and more live of conditions that are happening. And then the last note I have for that was Ms. Harris from DART discussing the airport site and working with all the county airports and discussing the possibilities, which is long-term planning in the ability to use the Half Moon Bay Airport to do evacuations in the case where the coast side is completely cut off. And with that, President Burke, I'll end my update.
Through the
Thank you.
chair, President Burke, can we get votes from Director Stockman on those 3 items he missed if he was still on the line when they happened?
We'll take care of that afterwards. We'll get that resolved through our attorney and the chief. How's that?
And then let me
Okay.
know, so when I do the minutes, thank you. Okay.
All right. Moving on, CERT report, Director Cheryl.
Thank you. First, if I may, I'd like to just make a point to Director Stockman's report regarding senior co-siders. We'll find out when the new census numbers come out, but it is interesting to note that that senior campus, Seacrest School area, is the most densely populated area on the coast side. There are 600 seniors in that area living in those 300 plus units, and 50% of them are mobility impaired. So as we think about districting, as we consider that we do have several vulnerable populations in our special district, that certainly is one of them. It's not the only senior community, of course, but it is the most densely populated. So,
Good point.
So, CERT report. We have 1,831 members, 293 CERTs, and 114 HAMs. We're a hub and spoke organization. We have 11 central leaders reporting to Chief Cosgrave, who continues to do an excellent job in guiding us on a day-to-day basis, despite all of his additional responsibilities. We have 32 neighborhoods, 12 are active, 10 are working hard on getting organized, and 10, we're still struggling to help them get to their feet. There's different issues. Our bank balance, we have $25,000 in the bank. We are entirely community funded. It comes through Coastside Gives largely. There are some individual donors, but in our first year of Coastside Gives, we raised $8,406 thanks to our generous community. And in the second year, as we went through COVID, we raised $15,482. So we're very pleased to know that the community appreciates these efforts and that this is actually how we fund ourselves. Our expenses to date are $2,287 and everything's in good hands. We have a list of upcoming events, but first just some business items. 50%, almost 50% of our $166,000 equipment grant has 42% of that has been delivered, and 59% of it is still to come. 11 neighborhoods have been given equipment bundles up and down the coast side, and they seem to be very pleased with them. And the last part of our business is that we have purchased a $1 million general liability insurance policy so that we are no longer piggybacking off of anyone else's. This is for when we have events that are not held on fire property. Increasingly, we meet at schools, at churches, at parking lots, at state parks, at various locations when our neighborhoods have their meetings, because we have to be outdoors. And that was, we got our price down from over $3,000 to $555. So for our $1 million policy. So that's our business side. Upcoming events. Neighborhoods are beginning to hold emergency preparedness days where they invite the whole neighborhood to come. They distribute information. They teach classes in CPR, in Stop the Bleed, in how to purify water. We were drinking water from Frenchman's Creek just on August 14th. So Frenchman's Creek, as well as Ocean Colony, as well as Montera are having those neighborhood events. On the 29th, the Chief Cosgrave is going to be presenting at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In Moss Beach, it's going to be on Zoom. He is addressing the whole neighborhood, but one of the things that CERT really hasn't done is reach out to our interfaith partners here on the coast side. So we are, that's coming up on the 29th. There is a, on September 11th, Frenchman's Creek, in preparation for the October 9th Great Coastside Shakeout, Frenchman's Creek is going to be the location of the practice session. That's an earthquake drill that encompasses the whole coastside. It picks up Pescadero, La Honda, those regions, Kings Mountain. It works with DART, it works at the airport, it works with different agencies. It's a sponsorship and it's a partnership with the Half Moon Bay Amateur Radio Club and Aries. And what we do is every neighborhood sets up a neighborhood command center. Chief Cosgrave gives a Zoom that says the earthquake drill is beginning. People put the number of people dropped up and cover, and they put how many people participated outside of their house on a sign. Our block captains in every neighborhood run around and count those people, and they radio in on the walkie-talkie network. Every neighborhood has a different channel, and they report that back to their neighborhood command center. At the neighborhood command center, the net control person reports it to the ham control person, who sends it to the DOC. Those numbers are added up. And it's an exercise, obviously, in every neighborhood, understanding how each individual, if you have a radio, nobody's alone here. You can communicate what you need to a neighborhood command center, which communicates to a DOC, which brings the answer back to you. And that is an accomplishment that has been sort of the vision of this, that Chief Cosgrave has had from the beginning. Last year, we had 611 people participate the first time on a Saturday, and we think this time, in the middle of COVID, and this time we think we're going to do much better. So that's happening there. There was supposed to be a San Mateo County Emergency Preparedness Day on September 18th, and that was canceled by the county because they have redirected the event center to be a mass pop-up COVID booster shot site. So this is indicative of the issue we are coping with throughout the coastside, which is the rise of the Delta variant and its effect on our various events. And the county this time is just going to jump right in and start giving the boosters to everyone. We are in the midst of teaching 100, I know I'm going on too long here, but 100 people in Spanish to give them the Listos Emergency Preparedness course and graduating them. It's an alliance with 3 different groups, ALAS, Coastside CERT, and Listos. Our next class is in September, and we will make our goal of 100 this year. I mentioned the Great Coastside Shakeout on October 9th, and our final training, basic CERT training day of the year is going to be November 6th, hopefully. And the good news is the city of Half Moon Bay is gathering their management and staff to come to be trained. It's the first time we've had a citywide participation in this basic training event. They're doing their online 9-module CERT training course now and will join us in November. So we are very grateful that we have been working hard to build these relationships with city and county agencies, and now it is coming together. So, thank you.
Very good, Cynthia. Thank you. Great report. Moving on, attorney's report. Kai, are you still on?
I am, and I have power back,
Woohoo.
but no report.
Okay. All right, fire chief's report. Chief Cox.
Thank you, President Berg. Just to start off, we have statistics back. Bruce,
Good.
one. The only thing I would say is we are not getting an auto-generated report for the number of cover-in assignments for any of our respective neighbors. I put a request into PSC for that report. We'll see when we get it. Just one item I want to point out on here is just the fire marshal's office workload. You've heard lately just how much construction new plans have come in. In the last month alone, 60 new plans were reviewed, construction within the district. So just the workload on that group. I'm sure when you stop by, you see them at their computers nonstop looking at plans, and that's a little bit of a trend right now. Apart from that, just a few items. Obviously, COVID is continuing. We are implementing the latest state guidance that we get regarding our personnel in accordance with the county health officers reporting. But by all means, COVID is still an issue. And I think everyone understands that. And that doesn't just affect the public, it affects us as well. Administration, we have successfully transferred all of our critical records to a long-term climate controlled storage environment. That is a company called Coro Data, who we selected, and our new SSA, Chris, is able to look in the log and have boxes delivered the next day after we request them on demand. So a big upgrade for tracking and retention purposes. We'll be canceling the lease for the old storage unit that we had out in Princeton. As far as management concerns, I've been participating in basically 2 countywide initiatives. One is participation in the countywide fuel reduction task force that's being led by Supervisor Horsley in Canapa, as well as a joint program looking at a potential grant application for a fire vegetation management coordinator countywide to do a lot more of what kind of Fire Safe is doing. So been a little bit involved with that. As far as the CAL FIRE actuals that you referred to, President Burke, one of the big differences this year is the benefit rate, and it's just been lower for the last just over a year and a half now. Which has brought down the overall contract rate for the district. And that's why you're seeing we're running about 30% below contracted amount. I will say that those potentially will go up in the future, but for now we're seeing significant savings. As far as operations, our call volume has been average. We have had an engine on the Dixie Fire for over a month. That engine is no longer assigned to the Dixie Fire. And it is one of 2 apparatus that actually is in the shop out of service mechanical. And the bad news, going from bad news to worse news, is we're waiting on back ordered parts. The supply chain issue is now starting to impact our operations. These are proprietary parts that we have no choice but to wait for. So we're not alone in this. There's a lot of agencies who are struggling with this, but we're doing all we can to keep as much operational equipment basically running. And hopefully we'll have better news on that moving forward. As far as the facilities go, today we confirmed that the light switch at the new station 41 is in and working in the captain's office. We also put a timer on it. So at 9 p.m., the floodlights go to 50%. At 10 p.m., the lights go off completely. And there's also an override switch in there that the captain has the option to actually turn that whole system off earlier if they deem that necessary. So that is operational. We have confirmation of that today. As far as apparatus is concerned, the new division chief's vehicle finally arrived. Just like all supply chain issues, here we are a year and a half later waiting for the arrival of the vehicle. It finally arrived. We'll be outfitting that. A new training team vehicle should be coming online here soon. And Chief Cosgrave is working with PSC on an updated dispatch protocol for the coastside volunteers so that they're alerted a little bit sooner on the time of dispatch to all major emergencies within the district. And then finally, we did receive notification this week that we were successful in receiving the $8,000 rural fire capacity grant that we submitted for new handheld radios for the volunteers. So we'll bring that resolution to the board before the end of the year. This is the same one that we got last year for structural PPE for the volunteers. This year we focused on radios. And then finally, I will turn it over to Chief Larkin for closing comments.
Yeah, I just wanted to tie into the actuals statement and the reduction in the overall cost of the contract. That has to do with CAL FIRE requiring our employees now to pay OPEB funding of their post-retirement benefits. So beforehand, the department did not require us to do that. Now they're requiring us to do that. So that reduction had a lot to do with that pre-funding of our post-retirement benefits for our CAL FIRE employees. As Chief Cox said, you will probably see that start to climb just a little bit, that staff benefit rate over time, but there should not be any significant increases now that the department has collected what they felt is a baseline to be able to fund that benefit for our employees going forward. So that should be good. I just wanted to say today was a significant day in my life. As you all probably received an email from me, I've officially announced my retirement from CAL FIRE effective November 5th. So just wanted the board to know that we'll be moving forward with a process. I'll be working with the department, CAL FIRE, to find my replacement in the very near future. The position's already been flown, and so we'll be moving forward. So I'll be departing on November 5th. So just thank you guys for all the support. I think our collaborative effort between the district and CAL FIRE has provided a solid foundation there on the coast and continue to provide a enhanced fire protection services for the coastsiders. So with that, end of my comments.
Congratulations,
Chief.
Chief Larkin.
Thank you.
Chief Larkin, your tenure here has been outstanding. You've been challenged with some really big problems, and you've handled them very professionally and just did a great job. Now, I'm not sure about your retirement date. I think the board has to vote on that, and I'm not sure that we would okay your retirement, but we wish you well. And Chief Cox, maybe you something a little bit more formal, you'd stick something on the October agenda for us to more formally thank Chief Larkin for his work. Okay. Questions of Chief Cox or Chief Larkin?
Just
Okay.
thanks, just
Done well.
gratitude.
Yeah.
Chief Larkin, what would you let us get started. You have guided us so well through our big grant thing, and through everything else you've done. Just a huge gratitude and thanks to you.
Well, thank you. And I apologize for my poor timing on my announcement and not getting it out a week earlier, but I had some other things that were in the mix, whether my date was going to be pushed back a little bit. So I apologize for that. It would have been a board agenda item, but I needed to get it out today for all the electeds. So thank you very much. So.
Good luck, Chief. Let me just change the subject here, but in your packet, I just want to, hopefully you've looked at this, but there's a couple of reports from PAS as to our financial standing for the trust fund that has to deal with the employees' health. And for the year 7/1/20 through 6/30/21, it's interesting. We started out a year ago in July at $3.8 million. We paid out $250,000, and yet our funding has increased to $4,500,000. That in 1 year is a 27% increase in that investment with PARS. Outstanding. Now, I certainly don't expect that to continue like that, but certainly for the year, it was outstanding. Are there any further questions, comments?
None.
Then without objection, we will close the regular meeting. The board will go into closed session, a conference with legal counsel regarding anticipated possible litigation and Government's Code 54956.9. Thank you all.
Thank you. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.